The rain was falling steadily on Portland's Pearl District that October evening in 2008, creating rippling reflections of neon gallery lights on the wet pavement. The city's artistic community was buzzing with anticipation for the opening of Fractures in Time, a controversial new exhibition by emerging artist Sophia Chen at the underground Blackbird Gallery. At 28, Sophia had already gained a reputation for creating art that challenged viewers' perceptions of reality, memory, and truth. Sophia Chen was not your typical Portland artist, though she fit perfectly into the city's eclectic creative landscape. Born to a Chinese-American father and Irish-American mother, she had moved to Portland 5 years earlier from San Francisco, drawn by the city's reputation for supporting unconventional artists and its thriving alternative art scene. With her striking appearance, jet black hair often streaked with temporary colors, multiple ear piercings, and an ever-changing collection of vintage band t-shirts, she embodied the creative spirit that made Portland a magnet for artists seeking to push boundaries. Her apartment in the Alberta Arts District was a testament to her artistic vision. The walls were covered with her own sketches, photographs, and mixed media pieces that seemed to blend seamlessly into one continuous narrative. The space felt more like an installation than a living space, with every object carefully chosen to contribute to an overall aesthetic that was both beautiful and unsettling. Sophia's art was difficult to categorize, which was exactly how she preferred it. She worked primarily in mixed media, combining photography, found objects, paint, and digital manipulation to create pieces that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Her work often explored themes of disappearance and transformation, featuring images that appeared normal at first glance, but revealed disturbing or surreal elements upon closer examination. The Blackbird Gallery was the perfect venue for Sophia's work. Located in a converted warehouse in an industrial part of southeast Portland, the gallery had built a reputation for showcasing art that mainstream venues wouldn't touch. Owner Marcus Webb, a former punk musician turned art dealer, had discovered Sophia's work at a group show 2 years earlier and had been planning a solo exhibition for her ever since. Fractures in Time consisted of 12 large-scale pieces that Webb described as photographs that remember things differently than they actually happened. Each piece began with a conventional photograph, family portraits, street scenes, architectural studies, but Sophia had manipulated them in ways that created a sense of temporal displacement. Figures appeared multiple times in the same frame, buildings seemed to exist in different time periods simultaneously, and familiar objects took on an otherworldly quality. The centerpiece of the exhibition was a triptych titled The Vanishing Point, which featured what appeared to be the same woman photographed in 3 different decades, despite the fact that the model was clearly the same age in all 3 images. The technical skill required to create such seamless temporal illusions was remarkable, but what made the piece truly unsettling was the expression on the woman's face, a look of recognition and terror that seemed to suggest she understood something that the viewer could not. Detective Ray Morrison of the Portland Police Bureau had no particular interest in art, but he found himself at the opening of Fractures in Time because his ex-wife Jennifer was a freelance art critic who had insisted he accompany her. Morrison was a practical man in his early 40s with 20 years of police experience that had taught him to be skeptical of anything that seemed too elaborate or mysterious. He preferred cases with clear motives and tangible evidence. The gallery was packed with Portland's artistic elite, a diverse crowd of tattooed millennials, aging hippies, well-dressed collectors, and curious professionals. The atmosphere was electric, with the kind of creative energy that made Portland's art scene so dynamic. People moved through the space with wine glasses in hand, engaging in intense conversations about technique, meaning, and the broader implications of Sophia's work. Morrison found himself oddly drawn to Sophia's pieces, despite his usual indifference to abstract art. There was something about the way she manipulated time and memory that reminded him of his own experience as a detective, the way witness accounts could vary wildly, the way evidence could tell different stories depending on how it was interpreted, the way truth itself seemed to be constantly shifting. Sophia herself was the center of attention at the opening, dressed in a flowing black dress that seemed to change color under different lighting. She moved through the crowd with confidence, discussing her work with collectors and critics, while maintaining an air of mystery about her process. Several people mentioned how difficult it was to pin down exactly how she achieved her effects, and Sophia seemed to enjoy keeping her techniques secret. Morrison watched as Sophia interacted with various attendees, noting the way she seemed to study each person carefully before engaging with them. It was the kind of observational skill he recognized in himself, the ability to read people quickly and adjust one's approach accordingly. But there was something else in her manner, a hyper-vigilance that reminded him of witnesses who had seen things they shouldn't have. Around 10 o'clock, Morrison noticed a man in an expensive dark suit who seemed out of place among the casually dressed art crowd. The man was older, probably in his 50s, with silver hair and the kind of bearing that suggested military or law enforcement background. He moved through the gallery systematically, spending long periods studying each piece while taking notes in a small leather notebook. What struck Morrison as odd was that the man seemed less interested in the artistic merit of the pieces than in their technical aspects. He was photographing details with a high-end camera, focusing on sections that didn't seem particularly significant from an aesthetic standpoint. More concerning was the way Sophia's demeanor changed when she noticed the man's presence. She became visibly tense and began glancing toward the gallery's exit. Morrison's police instincts kicked in, and he began moving closer to where the man was examining the vanishing point. As he approached, he could hear the man speaking quietly into a phone, using terms that sounded more like technical jargon than art criticism. The conversation was brief, but Morrison caught enough to understand that the man was reporting to someone about what he'd observed. When the man finished his call, he approached Sophia directly. Morrison couldn't hear their conversation over the crowd noise, but their body language told a clear story. The man was asking questions that Sophia obviously didn't want to answer, and she kept looking around as if seeking an escape route. The conversation lasted only a few minutes before the man handed her a business card and left the gallery. Morrison watched Sophia stare at the card for a long moment before crumpling it up and shoving it in her purse. She excused herself from the group she'd been talking with and disappeared into the gallery's back office. Morrison considered following her, but Jennifer chose that moment to drag him over to meet some of her art world friends. The rest of the evening proceeded normally, with the typical opening night rituals of wine consumption, networking, and animated discussions about the meaning and significance of the work. Several pieces sold to private collectors, and Marcus Webb seemed pleased with the reception. Sophia reappeared after about 20 minutes, but Morrison noticed that she seemed distracted for the remainder of the event. The opening officially ended at midnight, but a core group of attendees moved to a nearby bar to continue the celebration. Sophia declined to join them, saying she was exhausted and needed to go home. Morrison remembered thinking at the time that she seemed more frightened than tired, but he was dealing with his own concerns about getting Jennifer safely home after her evening of wine tasting. That was the last time anyone saw Sophia Chen. When Sophia failed to show up for a scheduled interview with the Portland Mercury the next afternoon, the journalist initially assumed it was typical artist flakiness. But when she missed a dinner appointment with her best friend Casey Martinez that evening, people began to worry. Casey had known Sophia since her first week in Portland, and Sophia had never missed a commitment without calling. Casey went to Sophia's apartment in Alberta and found the front door unlocked, which was unusual since Sophia was typically security conscious. The apartment looked normal at first glance, but careful observation revealed subtle signs of disturbance. Sophia's laptop was missing, along with several hard drives and USB devices that she used to store her digital work. Her cell phone was on the kitchen counter, which was odd since she never went anywhere without it. More troubling was what Casey found in Sophia's studio space. Several canvases had been removed from their frames, and there were gaps on the walls where smaller pieces had been hanging. A filing cabinet that Sophia used to store her photographs and reference materials had been rifled through, with papers scattered on the floor. Casey called the Portland police, and Detective Morrison found himself assigned to the case, a coincidence that would haunt him for years to come. When he arrived at Sophia's apartment, he immediately recognized the signs of a professional search. Whoever had been there knew what they were looking for, and had been careful not to cause obvious damage that would immediately alert neighbors or casual visitors. The initial investigation revealed little concrete information. Sophia's bank accounts showed no unusual activity. Her car was still parked outside her apartment, and she had no known enemies or stalkers. Her family in San Francisco hadn't heard from her, but that wasn't unusual since she typically called them only once or twice a month. The most significant lead came from Marcus Webb at the Blackbird Gallery. When Morrison described the man in the expensive suit who had approached Sophia at the opening, Webb became visibly uncomfortable. He admitted that the man had contacted him several weeks before the exhibition, claiming to be a collector interested in Sophia's work. Webb had given him Sophia's contact information, assuming he was a legitimate buyer. But Webb had since learned that the business card the man had given him was fake. The company listed on the card didn't exist, and the phone number led to a disconnected line. Webb was devastated that his carelessness might have put Sophia in danger, but Morrison assured him that he had no way of knowing the man's true intentions. The investigation expanded to include the FBI when Morrison discovered that Sophia's digital photography techniques were far more sophisticated than they initially appeared. Computer forensics experts who examined her remaining equipment found evidence that she was using advanced facial recognition software and image manipulation tools that were typically available only to law enforcement and intelligence agencies. FBI Special Agent Linda Kovich took over the case from Morrison, though she kept him involved as a consultant since he was familiar with the local art scene and had been present at the gallery opening. Kovich was a specialist in cases involving technology theft and industrial espionage, and she immediately suspected that Sophia's disappearance was connected to her technical capabilities rather than her artistic reputation. The investigation took a darker turn when Kovich's team discovered that Sophia's real name was not actually Sophia Chen. Birth records showed that she had legally changed her name from Susan Catherine Walsh 5 years earlier, just before moving to Portland. Susan Walsh had worked as a digital forensics specialist for a private security firm in San Francisco that had contracts with various government agencies. According to her former employer, Susan had quit abruptly after discovering that the company was involved in activities that violated her ethical boundaries. She had threatened to expose what she called illegal surveillance operations targeting American citizens. But before she could follow through on her threats, she had disappeared from San Francisco entirely. The revelation that Sophia had been living under an assumed identity cast her art in an entirely new light. Kovach realized that the temporal manipulation techniques Sophia used in her photography were actually sophisticated methods for detecting and exposing digital alterations in images. Her art wasn't just creative expression, it was a form of technical demonstration that could potentially expose fraudulent or manipulated photographs. This discovery led to a federal investigation of Sophia's former employer, Meridian Security Solutions, which had been providing digital forensic services to several intelligence agencies. The investigation revealed that Meridian had been involved in creating false evidence and manipulating digital records for clients who paid premium fees for such services. Sophia's Fractures in Time exhibition took on new meaning when investigators realized that several of the pieces contained hidden messages that exposed specific instances of digital manipulation. The Vanishing Point triptych, for example, was actually a demonstration of how the same person could be made to appear in photographs from different time periods, creating false historical records. But despite months of investigation and the involvement of multiple federal agencies, no trace of Sophia Chen was ever found. The case remained open, but active investigation was scaled back after 6 months when all leads had been exhausted. Morrison returned to his regular duties with the Portland police, but he never stopped thinking about the case that had started with a routine gallery opening. Years passed, and Sophia's disappearance became one of Portland's unsolved mysteries. The art community held annual memorial exhibitions in her honor, and her remaining pieces were displayed in galleries throughout the city. Marcus Webb kept the Blackbird Gallery running partly as a tribute to her memory, and Casey Martinez started a foundation that provided grants to emerging artists who, like Sophia, used their work to expose social and political injustices. Detective Morrison retired from the police force in 2015, but he continued to follow developments in the case. He maintained contact with FBI agent Kovich, who had moved on to other assignments but still checked for new information about Sophia periodically. Both investigators had the sense that they had uncovered only a small part of a much larger conspiracy, but without additional evidence they could only speculate about what had really happened. The case might have remained permanently unsolved, if not for an unrelated event that occurred in the fall of 2021. Urban explorer Jake Harrison was photographing abandoned buildings in industrial southeast Portland when he discovered that the old Multnomah Paper Company building, vacant since 2009, had been broken into by vandals. Harrison was documenting the damage for the building's owner when he discovered something extraordinary in what had once been the executive conference room. The walls were covered with dozens of photographs and mixed media pieces that bore an unmistakable resemblance to Sophia Chen's work. More shocking was the discovery of several pieces that had been reported missing from her apartment 13 years earlier. But these weren't simply stored artworks, they appeared to be part of an ongoing project. New photographs had been added to the collection, all dated within the past few years. The technical quality was consistent with Sophia's previous work, and the thematic content continued her exploration of time, memory, and digital manipulation. Harrison immediately contacted the Portland police, who in turn reached out to the FBI. Agent Kovac, now working in the Seattle field office, returned to Portland to examine the discovery. What she found exceeded even her most optimistic expectations for a breakthrough in the case. The abandoned building had been converted into a sophisticated art studio and living space. Hidden behind false walls were high-end computers, professional photography equipment, and an elaborate security system that had managed to keep the space secret for over a decade. Living quarters had been set up in the basement, complete with a kitchen, bedroom, and library filled with books on digital forensics, surveillance, and privacy rights. Most significantly, investigators found extensive documentation of Sophia's activities over the past 13 years. Rather than being kidnapped or killed, she had voluntarily gone into hiding after realizing that her former employers had tracked her to Portland and were planning to eliminate her as a security threat. The documentation revealed that Sophia had faked her own disappearance with the help of sympathetic contacts in the privacy rights community, who specialized in helping whistleblowers escape retribution. She had spent the past 13 years continuing her work exposing digital manipulation and surveillance overreach, using her art as a medium to communicate her findings to a network of activists and journalists. Her most recent work focused on documenting how artificial intelligence and deepfake technology were being used to create false evidence in criminal cases and manipulate public opinion through social media. The pieces found in the abandoned building were actually a comprehensive archive of digital manipulation techniques being used by government agencies and private contractors. But Sophia herself was not found in the building. According to documents discovered in her makeshift studio, she had detected surveillance activity in the area several weeks earlier and had moved to a new location. She had left the art behind as a message, knowing that eventually someone would discover it and understand its significance. Among the documents was a letter addressed to Detective Morrison, thanking him for his thorough investigation and expressing regret that she couldn't reveal herself earlier without putting him and others in danger. The letter explained that she had been monitoring news coverage of her case over the years and had been impressed by his commitment to finding the truth. The letter also contained instructions for reaching her through encrypted communications channels, but when Morrison and Agent Kovac attempted to make contact, they received no response. It seemed that Sophia had anticipated this discovery and had moved on to yet another hiding place, continuing her shadow existence as a digital forensics vigilante. The revelation of Sophia's survival and her reasons for disappearing sent shockwaves through both the art world and law enforcement communities. Her case became a symbol of the dangers faced by whistleblowers and the lengths to which some people will go to expose corruption and protect civil liberties. Marcus Webb organized a new exhibition at the Blackbird Gallery, featuring the works found in the abandoned building, along with documentation of Sophia's 13-year investigation into digital surveillance and manipulation. The exhibition, titled Hidden in Plain Sight, drew international attention and sparked debates about government surveillance, digital privacy, and the role of artists in exposing social and political injustices. Casey Martinez used the renewed attention to expand her foundation's mission, providing not just financial support to emerging artists, but also security assistance to those whose work might put them at risk of retaliation from powerful interests. The foundation developed relationships with privacy rights organizations and civil liberties lawyers to help artists protect themselves while continuing their important work. Detective Morrison, now working as a private investigator, found himself consulting on cases involving missing persons who might have gone into hiding rather than being kidnapped or killed. His experience with the Sophia Chen case had taught him that sometimes disappearance is a form of survival, and that not every missing person wants to be found. Agent Kovac continued her work with the FBI, but the Sophia Chen case changed her approach to investigations involving technology and surveillance. She became an advocate within the Bureau for stronger protections for whistleblowers and for more careful oversight of digital forensics techniques that could be misused to create false evidence. The abandoned building where Sophia's art was discovered became an unofficial landmark for Portland's art community. Though the building was eventually demolished to make way for new development, The art community succeeded in preserving Sophia's improvised studio space, which was reconstructed as a permanent installation at the Portland Art Museum. In 2023, 2 years after the discovery in the abandoned building, a package arrived at the Portland Mercury with no return address. Inside was a USB drive containing hundreds of previously unseen photographs and digital artworks, along with a brief note. The work continues. Truth has a way of surfacing, even when buried under layers of deception. The technical analysis of the new works confirmed that they were created by the same person who had produced the pieces found in the abandoned building. More importantly, the content suggested that Sophia was still actively investigating and documenting instances of digital manipulation and surveillance overreach. The new works included devastating exposés of how deepfake technology was being used to create false evidence in high-profile criminal cases, how social media algorithms were being manipulated to influence political elections, and how private contractors were conducting illegal surveillance on American citizens for corporate clients. Each piece in the new collection was a masterwork of both artistic expression and investigative journalism, combining visual beauty with damning evidence of systemic corruption. The technical skill required to create such works had clearly evolved over the 13 years since Sophia's disappearance, suggesting that she had continued to develop her capabilities while in hiding. The Portland Mercury published the new works along with extensive analysis by digital forensics experts who confirmed their authenticity and significance. The publication triggered a series of federal investigations into the activities documented in Sophia's art, leading to indictments of several government officials and private contractors involved in illegal surveillance programs. But perhaps the most powerful aspect of the new collection was a series of self-portraits showing Sophia at different ages over the past 13 years. The portraits were created using the same temporal manipulation techniques she had pioneered in her early work, but now they told the story of a woman who had sacrificed her identity, her relationships, and her freedom to continue fighting for truth and justice. The self-portraits showed the toll that years of hiding had taken on her, the stress lines, the prematurely gray hair, the haunted expression of someone who carried dangerous secrets. But they also showed her evolution as both an artist and an activist, revealing someone who had found meaning and purpose in her shadow existence. The final piece in the collection was a photograph of the Portland skyline taken from a vantage point that investigators couldn't identify despite extensive searching. Embedded in the image were dozens of smaller photographs showing locations throughout the city where surveillance equipment had been illegally installed. The message was clear. Sophia was still in Portland, still watching, and still documenting the activities of those who threatened civil liberties. Detective Morrison, now in his 60s, often found himself walking through the neighborhoods where Sophia's surveillance photographs had been taken, wondering if she was still there, still observing the city she had chosen to protect from the shadows. He carried with him the business card she had included with the new artworks, a card that listed her as S. Chen, Digital Truth Specialist, with no contact information except the words, "The truth will surface." Agent Kovich, approaching retirement herself, had come to view the Sophia Chen case as the most important of her career. It had taught her that traditional law enforcement approaches were inadequate for addressing the complex technological and ethical challenges of the digital age. She had become a lecturer at the FBI Academy, using Sophia's case to teach new agents about the intersection of technology, civil liberties, and national security. The art world continued to grapple with the implications of Sophia's work and her unusual approach to activism. Some critics argued that her methods were too extreme, that going into hiding for 13 years was an overreaction to whatever threats she had faced. Others hailed her as a pioneer, who had found a new way to combine artistic expression with investigative journalism and civil rights advocacy. Marcus Webb, now in his 60s and still running the Blackbird Gallery, had become something of a guardian of Sophia's legacy. He organized annual exhibitions featuring new works by artists who were following in her footsteps, using their art to expose corruption and challenge authority. The gallery had become a gathering place for activists, journalists, and artists who believed in the power of creative expression to create social change. Casey Martinez had transformed her foundation into a national organization that provided support not just to artists, but to anyone using creative methods to expose injustice. The foundation had helped dozens of whistleblowers disappear safely when their lives were threatened, using techniques pioneered by the network that had helped Sophia vanish 13 years earlier. The abandoned building discovery had also sparked a broader conversation about the ethics of digital manipulation and the need for better tools to detect falsified evidence. Universities began offering courses on digital forensics and media literacy, teaching students how to identify manipulated images and videos in an era of increasingly sophisticated deception. Sophia's techniques for detecting digital manipulation became standard tools used by news organizations, law enforcement agencies, and civil rights organizations. Her artistic methods had evolved into legitimate forensic science, helping to maintain trust in visual evidence at a time when such trust was under constant assault. In 2024, 15 years after her disappearance, Sophia Chen was posthumously awarded the Portland Arts Commission's Lifetime Achievement Award for her contributions to both art and civil liberties. The award ceremony was held at the Blackbird Gallery, with hundreds of people gathering to honor someone who might or might not still be alive. Detective Morrison spoke at the ceremony, reflecting on how the case had changed his understanding of justice and truth. He talked about learning that sometimes the best way to serve justice is to help someone disappear, rather than to find them, and that sometimes the most important investigations are the ones that are never officially solved. Agent Kovich also spoke, discussing how Sophia's case had influenced FBI policy regarding digital evidence and whistleblower protection. She revealed that several ongoing investigations had been launched based on evidence contained in Sophia's art, and that these investigations had led to significant reforms in how intelligence agencies conducted surveillance operations. The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of a new installation at the gallery, a rotating display of anonymous artworks submitted by artists around the world who were using their work to expose corruption and fight for civil liberties. The installation was titled, "The Work Continues," echoing the note that had accompanied Sophia's most recent submission. As the attendees filed out of the gallery into the Portland evening, many wondered if Sophia Chen was among them, watching from the crowd as her legacy was celebrated. It was the kind of question that had no answer, which seemed appropriate for someone who had spent her career exploring the boundary between reality and illusion, truth and deception. The rain was falling steadily that October evening, just as it had 15 years earlier when Sophia Chen had first disappeared. The reflections of gallery lights on the wet pavement created the same rippling patterns, but the city itself had changed. Portland's art scene had evolved, influenced in part by the questions Sophia's work had raised about the nature of truth and the responsibility of artists to challenge authority. Detective Morrison walked slowly through the Pearl District after the ceremony, thinking about all the cases he had worked over the years and how few of them had clear, satisfying resolutions. The Sophia Chen case had taught him that sometimes the most important victories are the ones where nobody gets credit, where the hero remains anonymous, and where justice is served in ways that never make it into official reports. As he passed a construction site where an old building was being demolished, Morrison noticed a small piece of graffiti on a temporary wall. "Truth has a way of surfacing." The words were written in a distinctive handwriting that reminded him of the notes Sophia had left with her artworks, but before he could examine it more closely, a security guard asked him to move along. Morrison smiled as he walked away, wondering if he had just encountered another message from Portland's most famous missing person. It was the kind of mystery that would have frustrated him as a young detective, but that now brought him a strange sense of comfort. In a world where so many injustices went unpunished and so many truths remained hidden, it was reassuring to think that somewhere out there, someone was still watching, still documenting, and still fighting for accountability. The artist had vanished after her Portland exhibit 13 years ago, but her work continued to appear, continued to expose corruption, and continued to inspire others to use their talents in service of justice. In the end, perhaps that was the most successful disappearing act of all, to vanish completely while remaining more present and influential than ever before. As Morrison reached his car, he found a small envelope tucked under the windshield wiper. Inside was a photograph of the ceremony he had just attended, taken from an angle that suggested the photographer had been in the crowd. On the back of the photograph, in that same distinctive handwriting, was written, "Thank you for not giving up on the truth." Morrison looked around the empty street, seeing nothing but rain and shadows. But somewhere in those shadows he knew Sophia Chen was still out there, still creating, still exposing the lies that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. The artist had vanished, but the truth remained, surfacing whenever it was needed most, reminding the world that some people will sacrifice everything to ensure that justice prevails. the case of Sophia Chen would never be officially closed, because the best missing person cases are the ones where the person chooses to stay missing, continuing their work from the shadows, protected by their invisibility. In a city that prided itself on supporting unconventional artists, there was perhaps no more unconventional artist than one who used her own disappearance as her greatest work of art.